Fallout 4 is literally littered with quests, including 4 main converging storylines, 2 big DLCs, and enough side quests to at least double, if not triple that number. But in amongst the classics that everyone's played, sit several that to this day almost nobody knows about, either because they involve making bizarre prerequisite decisions and usually get locked out, or they're just pretty damn elusive. So let's check out 6 secret quests you probably never played in Fallout 4. This first one takes place over in the memory den of Goodneighbor, a place that, yes, everybody will have to come to with Nick Valentine as part of the main story, but did you know that it's actually possible to head here before that? Of course, the main questline will direct you to Concord, then Diamond City, and there's not really a reason to head into the dangerous Boston ruins and find Goodneighbor until we're distinctively told to. But from the second we leave Vault 111, we could, if we're so inclined, make a literal beeline for Goodneighbor, heading inside and then directly to the memory den for a unique quest most people are unknowingly locked out of. You can also come here a little while later, just so long as it's before we meet Nick Valentine. This place, of course, utilizes memory lounges to allow customers to more lucidly relive their past experiences. In fact, if you played Fallout 3, you'll notice they're very similar to the Tranquility Lounges of Vault 112, used for very similar, albeit far more twisted purposes by Stanislaus Braun. Anyway, walk right up and speak to Irma as though we were a standard customer, which in this case, we are.
You don't look like you need the memory den. Do you even know what we do here?
And with either a payment or a persuasion check, we'll be directed to one of the lounges for a trial run. Also, you'll notice Deacon is just kind of in there chilling and subtly casing up whether we're railroad material. But hopping in our own lounger, we'll be greeted by the classic please stand by screen before falling back into our most prevalent and powerful memory. And okay, this isn't too dissimilar from what we'll experience later in the main questline, but unlike the Kellogg's memory quest, this one is relived entirely from the perspective of the sole survivor, who, traumatized by reliving this harrowing moment again, will make a number of unique comments.
Oh my God.
Computers are still working.
Nora!
That's good.
I can't watch this again. It should have been me. Why didn't they take me?
I'm not giving you Sean!
I'm gonna kill you!
So, coming out of the memory, we can, given its traumatic nature, also demand some compensation, which, if we blagged our way into the memory lounger for free to begin with, nets us a nice 100 caps profits. And because we must have ventured so wildly off course to even obtain this quest, Irma will then send us back to Diamond City, suggesting we desperately need a detective, and specifically telling us to call on Nick Valentine. Later, of course, we'll still come back here and experience the same memory for a third time, so it is just a bit of extra trauma for the sole survivor. Still, the whole thing is a cool reward for those who like to ignore main quests and just go off exploring. Now, usually in Bethesda games, I make every effort to keep as many characters alive as possible. I mean, you never know who's gonna rock up with an extra quest for you later, or just have additional smaller interactions somewhere in some story. So, in a bizarre deviation from the norm, this next quest, the Marowski Heist, can only be triggered provided a relatively innocent NPC dies during the previous quest, Diamond City Blues. And to start this whole story off, head to the Colonial Tap House in Diamond City to witness a domestic between Paul Pembroke, his wife Darcy, and her lover, Henry Cook. After being beaten up by Henry, Paul will later find us out in the market, requesting we accompany him as hired muscle, as he's planning to confront Henry and put an end to his wife's affair once and for all. But if we go along with Paul and then refuse to back him up, odds are he'll most likely die to Henry, which again, sadly, is something that needs to happen to trigger the next hidden quest. Alternatively, we can still keep Paul alive a little longer. By actually backing him up, Henry will instead cut a deal, sharing a plan he has to make a lot of quick caps by ambushing a chem deal between wannabe Diamond City gangster Nelson Latimer and some triggermen, who are agents of Marowski, a guy that supplies chems from over in Goodneighbor. And going to bust this deal with Henry and Paul is another more honorable opportunity for Paul to die. Just trigger the combat, then stay out the way and let the others fight it out to the death. Though that's all easier said than done, and this, I kid you not, is exactly how it went for me.
Hi. You better get the fuck out of here if you know what's good for you.
I'm here for the chems and the money. Oh, and to kill you all.
What? But shit!
What's that? Nothing personal, but I can't leave any witnesses.
Wait! I can tell you how to find
I told you it was no problem. The money should still be on Nelson's body.
Easily the most consistently hilarious 5 minutes I've had in Fallout 4, but annoyingly, Paul did survive all of this, and if that happens, our only choice to unlock the next quest is to do this.
No, I'm taking all of it, as the rest of my payment.
After all we've been through with this guy?
That was never part of the deal.
Here we go.
Now, just finish up the rest of the Diamond City Blues quest, and luckily Trish had a note leading to the chem lab on her, you know, in case of random explosions. So go do that, then return to Diamond City a few days later and speak to Malcolm Latimer. He'll accuse you of killing his son if Nelson died, and we'll need to convince him that we didn't.
I didn't kill Nelson. Whoever told you that was lying.
With that done, return to Diamond City again a couple days later, where finally Darcy has begun to question the whereabouts of her husband. And when she asks us, we want to tell her what's happened, but if we were responsible, then obviously that needs to be kept to ourselves. Seriously though, she really doesn't press us for any answers.
Paul's dead.
Oh my God. How do you know what happened?
No, I just heard that he was dead.
No! I can't believe it.
Some solid A-tier writing from Bethesda there. Okay, now we want to leave Diamond City for an even longer period of time. Go wait somewhere else for a good few days whilst Darcy grieves her husband, whom she was cheating on, before returning again. And this time, when we find Darcy, it'll finally start this very elusive, difficult to get quest.
Look at this old photograph that Paul had hidden away.
It's a blurry image, I know, but the photograph shows Paul Pembroke, Henry Cook, and Malcolm Latimer stood in front of an old warehouse. A warehouse that once belonged to good neighbor's chem supplier, Marowski. So basically, 20 years ago, this trio of men destroyed Marowski's warehouse of chems, ruining the man's business and forcing him, even to this day, to now operate out of the Hotel Rexford. Marowski put out a bounty to find the perpetrators that ruined his life, but they were never caught, and the photograph was taken as an insurance of sorts, preventing the three from ratting on each other, as they could always prove that the others were then involved. Now, Paul evidently squandered his share of the takings and has now sadly died. Henry, I suppose, bought the Colonial Tap House, whilst Malcolm seemingly used his score to work his way up to one of the most powerful men in Diamond City. Now, with Paul dead and Darcy finally learning the truth about her husband's past, she would like to make a quick cap from it, to aid with the difficulties of now being a single mother. So, handing the photo to us, she requests that we go away and make some money with it, either bribing Malcolm Latimer to keep the thing hidden, or collecting the long-standing bounty from Marowski. I think originally there was also an option for Henry Cook as well, but given he leaves Diamond City by this point, or possibly just dies, that option can't actually seemingly occur in the game, I don't think. So, taking it to Malcolm, he'll offer 400 caps, though can be persuaded up to 600, the highest we can net overall for just selling the photograph. Now, of course, Darcy would like half of that for giving us the photo in the first place, and 300 caps is the only sum she'll actually be pleased with, though we can also refuse to give her anything without much consequence. She'll just complain that all the men in her life betray her and hate us for the rest of the game. We can alternatively head over to Good Neighbor and show the photo to Marowski. He'll only pay us a flat 500 caps, but we can net more overall doing it this way, as after learning that Malcolm Latimer destroyed his entire life and built up his own from it, Marowski will hire us to assassinate Malcolm for an additional 300 caps that we don't need to share with Darcy. Now, most companions won't be too happy about this, and it does feel like a pretty cold, ruthless move, but given the Nazim level energy Malcolm so often gives off,
You belong down in the lower section of the city. It's more suitable for those lacking in ambition.
I'm not gonna lie, it's a real tempting thing to do. So, all told, actually a pretty sizable quest, which, if like me, you have a tendency to try and keep most NPCs alive, you'll most likely have never come across. Another pretty big quest, which most players will by default be locked out of, takes place in the Institute, and becomes unlockable after completing Mankind Redefined, the meeting following the Battle of Bunker Hill, where Father addresses the future of the Institute. So from that point on, go and speak to Justin Ao. He'll issue us with a unique quest, but only under a very specific condition. We mustn't have advanced the Railroad questline pretty much at all. Of course, we'll have to have made first contact with them to get inside the Institute to begin with, but beyond that, we mustn't complete our proper initiation, the quest Tradecraft, and instead the Battle of Bunker Hill must be completed on the side of the Institute, or the Brotherhood, but that doesn't really matter here. You see, had we properly joined the Railroad, then we'd have been tasked with secretly infiltrating the Institute, making contact with their informant known as Patriot, and working together to arm rebel synths to eventually stage an uprising. If we're not working with the Railroad though, and have essentially betrayed them in the Battle of Bunker Hill, things take a very different turn. We may not end up working directly with Patriot, but they are of course still operating inside the Institute, helping rogue synths to escape to the wasteland above. But Justin Ao, acting head of synth retention because the real guy in charge is off back in Fallout 3, well, Justin has been noticing this spike in disappearing synths, and he's managed to track the problem to the robotics division. Realistically, the only guy in there with the clearance to pull this off is Alan Benet, so Justin tasks us with finding proof, beginning the quest plugging the leak. This leads us for a while along a trail of terminals dotted around the Institute, where we're tracking access logs in order to get to the bottom of things, which will quickly bring us to Alan's residence, where we meet his son Liam and their personal synth who aids in domestic duties, called Eve.
If all personal synths are as good looking as you, I should get one for myself.
Why, thank you. I'll take that as a compliment.
However, we'll soon learn that the unassuming synth persona isn't the true depth of Eve as a character, and that her attachment for her family goes a little bit further than that.
Don't come any closer. I'm sorry that you had to find me here.
You're the one who's been helping the synths escape?
Me? No, I'm just helping.
Turns out though that Eve isn't the perpetrator of all this, but actually is attempting to cover up for Liam, Alan's son. At which point we'll most likely have to kill her to continue the quest, unless we have a very high charisma, and convince her we'll keep the secret. Now, of course, most of you probably played this from the Railroad side, so Liam being the culprit shouldn't come as a surprise, though it's pretty cool that they actually made a whole quest around this plot point for people who didn't join the Railroad, and following it through to the end, we have a final choice to make, netting one of two substantial rewards.
I want to frame Justin Ao. Look, ever since Dr. Zimmer left, he's been out of control.
So, first off, in an interesting twist, despite not being with the Railroad in this timeline, we can still technically act in their interests. Framing Ao will result in his banishment from the Institute, much to the shock of the entire community. Alan Benet will express disbelief at Justin's hypocrisy. Eve, if alive, will thank us for saving her family. Liam will continue his covert operations, freeing rebellious synths in small, infrequent quantities, and also gift us his glasses to say thank you. These things claim to increase intelligence by 2 and our charisma by 1. Though according to online sources, the charisma stat is mistyped, and they actually deduct 1 charisma instead, which, given the insane dialogue options often unlocked by that stat throughout the game, isn't actually that great. And I don't know about you, but I think they look kinda cool, so should actually buff charisma, in my eyes. As for Justin Ao in this ending then, he will, like I said, be banished to the surface, disappearing from the game, and I don't think we can ever find him in the Wastelands. And he will be replaced by Alanis Accords, who I guess will become acting head of the Synth Retention Bureau. Alternatively to all of this, we can remain a full Institute loyalist, plugging the leak as per the quest name, turning Liam in, and further retaining our Institute synth assets. Justin Ao, impressed by our efforts, will reward us with a large handful of 1,000 bottle caps from the Institute treasury, and Liam this time will be banished to the surface. Again, never to be found. Alan, in this case, will be devastated, blaming himself for his son's banishments. And if we lied to Eve, promising to keep the secret, she won't be angry now, just disappointed. Although, in some sense, this ending to Liam's story is actually better than if we meet and help him through through the railroad questline, and then side with them up to the destruction of the Institute. Liam never expects that his lending a helping hand to synths would have resulted in the destruction of his whole family and world, and will actually choose death over that immense guilt, leaving behind an angry letter that we're an awful person and destroyed humanity's hope for the future. So really, the best outcome for Liam Bonet is either of these two results in the alternative non-railroad timeline. And again, a pretty fleshed out and complete quest, which only comes at the trade-off of an entire faction questline, and thus I imagine is completely missed by most. Next up is another alternate quest that kind of relates to the Institute, but this time only occurs if we become banished from there. This is actually remarkably easy to do, just kill anybody inside, and it can even be done as early as killing Father, like the second he walks in the door. But in essence, to get this quest, we have to become banished from the Institute, and we have to do it before completing the From Within quest to poach Dr. Madison Lee for the Brotherhood of Steel. For most people, the Doctor from Rivet City is a major throwback to Fallout 3, and following the events of that game, she's parted ways with the Brotherhood and headed north to the Commonwealth, being appointed head of the Institute's advanced systems, which additionally affords her refuge in a place the Brotherhood can't possibly find her and silence her for what she knows. But when the Commonwealth Brotherhood need to get Liberty Prime back online to fight the Institute, they cannot do so without Dr. Lee's expertise. Thus, getting banished from the Institute whilst Madison Lee is still inside creates a very big problem for the Brotherhood, an issue that would, if not for this hidden contingency quest, force the questline to halt entirely and make us default to the Minutemen or the Railroad. But in the same way we were the backup for the Institute's plan, the Brotherhood of Steel have a backup of their own. Another robotics expert living out in the Science Center of Diamond City called Professor Scara, with Professor being her first name and not her title, interestingly.
Professor is my first name, not my title. The whole thing's rather complicated. Perhaps I'll explain it to you sometime.
Yeah, she never explains. So effectively, this is just an alternate branch of the Liberty Reprimed quest, but does take us through some interesting twists and turns. When heading to the Science Center, specifically to recruit Professor Scara, her partner, Dr. Duff, explains that she's gone missing. And this will lead us to the General Atomics Galleria, which is a shopping mall run by Mr. Handy's, where we potentially have to pay $5,000, that's dollars, not caps, for the privilege of walking across some ruined bowling alleys to reach Professor. Or we can just kindly ask to look around with some persuasion. Scara will say that she's currently still very busy studying these robots, but doesn't take much convincing to instead join the Brotherhood when we explain she'll be working on Liberty Prime, the greatest symbol of democracy and freedom, as well as the greatest robot in the world. In fact, hacking her terminal back at the Science Center, we can learn that already she's been dreaming of the chance to gain access to the Brotherhood's robotics technology. And I guess thanks to us being far too trigger-happy with the Institute, her dreams get to come true. And actually, while she then occupies a practically identical role to Dr. Madison Lee, with Ingram even using much of the same dialogue lines, Scara takes absolutely no convincing to begin working on Prime, and is therefore much more enthusiastic about the project than her counterparts, who of course left the Brotherhood in the first place due to their overly militarized nature. And maybe Professor Scara has less moral quandaries than Dr. Lee, or perhaps she simply hasn't borne witness to the utter destruction the Brotherhood are capable of when they apply themselves. It's a pretty cool alternate solution to this questline, and whilst Dr. Lee is still very much a throwback, in a way, I prefer working alongside the more positive attitude of Professor Scara. Though, admittedly, her partner Dr. Duff will remain depressed at Scara leaving the Science Center for the rest of the game, which is sad.
I'd really prefer to be alone right now.
Now, this next one isn't a huge quest by itself, but rather a collection of 6 smaller secret quests that are very obscure and blend in ridiculously well. And I'm talking about the messages in bottles, which can be found buried on the beaches up and down the coast, containing bizarre and often funny little bits of text, which somehow lead us to a loot stash of whoever wrote it. So, going from south to north, let's see where they all are and what exactly happened. So, first of all, you want to come a fair fair bit south of the FMS Northern Star shipwreck, east of the Poseidon energy plant, to find a red buoy just below this lighthouse. This one is called Not Going Well, and simply says, "I'm screwed." Helpful of whoever wrote this to explain their situation, where roughly they can be found, and how one might rescue them, rather than just saying this. Except after reading it, we will get a quest marker of exactly where we need to look. So, I don't know, maybe canonically there are instructions like that written down, only we the player can't read them. So in this case, we'll swim out to sea and dive directly down from where the quest marker is to uncover a pipe with a maintenance hatch where presumably somehow at some point this person got trapped a very long time ago. And now all that's left to do is loot the chest that they had with them. And this effectively is the same kind of layout that we follow for all 6. So a bit further north this time, you'll want to come to the southern gate of the castle and immediately head east to find Predator Becomes Prey, which recalls how a fisherman was dragged into the sea by a huge fish and had been stupid enough to tether his fishing pole to himself. Problem also being that the keys to the boat were in his pocket, which left presumably his wife stranded as well, on a boat that eventually sank and we'll have to swim down to. Then, for the third one, you want to come southeast of the Boston airport to the lower corner of this peninsula obscured by the Pridwen, and this one is called Need a Hand, a more literal meaning than you might first think, because it reads, quote, "I thought I ate a fish today. It didn't taste right. I then realized while writing this that I ate my own hand. I think I'm losing it." End quote. Okay, what level of hunger or possibly radiation has this person been exposed to? I mean, there's biting your nails and then there's... Anyway, diving down this time, we'll find an entire plane wreck, which doesn't really make sense to me because presumably someone trapped on this plane would have drowned immediately, but maybe they were a survivor of the plane wreckage and got marooned on an outcrop further out to sea or clung on to a piece of floating debris. The plane crash would possibly then be a reference to Castaway, but not so much The Hand. Anyway, moving on, the next one is found at the eastern end of the island Nahant, southeast of the Oceanological Society, and will involve actually fighting a lot of glowing Mirelurks to get to the bottle. But when we do, it's called X Marks the Spot, the final testament of a treasure hunter who paddled out to sea in search of loot after hearing about it on TV. It seems their boat eventually sank, and inconveniently for us, it just so happens to be in a very, very, very deep region of the sea. Too deep to dive down and back up again in one breath. But if you don't have anything to bestow water-breathing abilities, then I just downed like 3 Nuka-Cola Quantums on the way back up, with the health boost then overtaking the health drain, so I couldn't die. Again, the prize really is just a trunk, and the exploration aspect I think is the biggest part of the reward here. Now, second from last is situated on the coast south of Salem, not too far from the always hostile Children of Atom settlement's Crater House. And this one is called Trapped for Days, where a tidal wave, presumably from a nuclear blast, flipped this guy's boat, sinking it and trapping him inside. In the note, he remarks on still having air to breathe, so I think horrifically, he must have actually eventually died of starvation or thirst, rather than suffocation. And finally, right up in the north, on the eastern edge of macro fish packing, lies a bottle near a little rowboat called Difficult to Kill, which reads, quote, "Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs." End quote. Just a literal quote from Die Hard, whose meaning in this case is even more literal. And at the bottom of the ocean, lying in a bathtub, is a skeleton with 3 more Die Hard references, those being a flip lighter, a pack of duct tape, and a teddy bear. Plus, you know, the standard chest of loot for us. And with those 6 messages in bottles discovered, it's on to our last entry. Continuing with the coastal theme for this last one, now we want to head over to the island of Far Harbor for a quest that annoyingly seems to have no definitive means of triggering. Shipbreaker is a randomly occurring radio signal that we can pick up around the island. And whilst I found it up in the northern half, that's not to say you will. And in fact, I had to wander a fair long while after completing the main storyline before finally landing this quest. Whilst most players, I'd imagine, would have long ago returned rest of the Commonwealth. Which is a shame, because the Shipbreaker quest is a fun and challenging boss fight, which if we discuss with old Longfellow beforehand, he'll establish some interesting context. You see, the source of this mysterious radio signal isn't some man-made beacon, but rather a very specific and very old fog crawler, with a distinctive yellow color and a lot of algae growing off its carapace. Its radio trackability, Longfellow suspects, comes as a result of its extensively long life in the fog, causing it to now emit some kind of radio wave interference when nearby. Over the years, it's taken several of Longfellow's friends, and judging by the name Shipbreaker, probably several smaller vessels as well. But in this case, up against our ultra-powerful protagonist, its ability to be tracked on the radio will be Shipbreaker's undoing. Essentially, once we've established the elusive signal, we merely have to follow it until we find Shipbreaker. Then, defeating it in a tougher than usual fight, it disappointingly won't drop anything particularly interesting, save for a randomly spawning piece of legendary loot. But first things first, we have cleared the island of its greatest fog crawler menace, and Longfellow is, for the most part, pretty grateful, but does also remark that all the years wandering the fog, fearing Shipbreaker, did help him to always maintain his wits. Though, to be fair, there's still plenty of dangers lurking out there. Dangers we can now face down with the reward gifted to us from Longfellow, the unique harpoon gun, Skipper's Last Stand, that grants 150 additional damage resistance when reloading. A particularly useful buff to have on a weapon that only fires one shot at a time. In fact, it would have been a nice thing to have back there against Shipbreaker, but I guess now it'll be reserved for the likes of Mirelurks and Gulpers. Overall then, a fun little quest and a good reason to wander the foggy terrain of Far Harbor for a while longer. And with Shipbreaker defeated, that's 6 quests almost everyone misses in Fallout 4, either because they're secretive or just straight up locked behind odd strings of decisions. But let me know in the comments of any more hidden or contingency quests like this, and if there are enough, then maybe I'll do a part 2. Or perhaps a larger compilation of smaller, obscure quests, something like that. Thank you, as always, to the patrons who help make content like this possible, and if you'd like to support the production of more videos like this, then check that out in the link down below, where you can also find my Discord server, as well as a GOG affiliate link to pick up a bunch of awesome, often discounted games, including the Fallout series. Thank you for watching, I'm Sam Brown, and have a great day.